On Easter Sunday morning, April 6, 2026, Pastor Tammy McCollum stood at the front of the Well Worship Center in Statesville, North Carolina, and preached. She had done it hundreds of times before. She knew how to fill a room with something that made people feel seen, feel held, feel the specific warmth of a congregation that gathers because it believes in something larger than the individual difficulties of the week behind it. Easter Sunday is not an ordinary Sunday. It is the Sunday that the entire liturgical year builds toward, the Sunday that fills pews with people who might not come any other week, the Sunday that demands the most from the person standing at the front. Tammy McCollum gave it everything she had. She always did. After the service ended, after the congregation filed out into the April morning, after the handshakes and the embraces and the quiet conversations that happen in the doorway of every church on every Sunday between a pastor and the people she has been pouring herself into, Tammy McCollum went home. She went home to the house in Northwest Charlotte that she shared with her husband of more than 30 years, Eddie McCollum. She went home to rest, to exhale, to let the energy of Easter morning settle into the ordinary quiet of an afternoon, after a morning that had asked a great deal of her. She was 58 years old. She had a beautiful smile and a bright spirit and a laugh that people remembered. She had been married to the same man for more than 3 decades. She had stood at a pulpit and told her congregation what she believed, and she had gone home. Shortly after 2 a.m. the following morning, Eddie McCollum called 911. He told the dispatcher what he had done. "Oh my God," he said, "I just shot my wife. We were arguing." His voice, captured in the recording that would later be cited in news reports and court documents, was hysterical, overcome. He cried out to God repeatedly in the moments after the admission. "Lord, help me," he said. When the dispatcher instructed him to exit the home with his hands up to meet the responding officers, he refused. "No," he said, "I'm not leaving her." The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department arrived at the residence and found Pastor Tammy McCollum suffering from gunshot wounds. They pronounced her dead at the scene. Eddie McCollum, 61 years old, was taken into custody. He was charged with first-degree murder. His bond was set at $1 million. Welcome to Behind the Evidence. This channel goes past the headline and into the full picture, the person behind the case, the questions the case forces us to ask, and the truth that deserves more than a news cycle. Subscribe now if you are not already here. This story is one that the faith community, the domestic violence community, and anyone who has ever watched a long marriage from the outside and assumed they understood what was happening inside it, needs to hear. Now let's go back to the beginning. Tammy McCollum was not just a pastor. She was a person with a life that existed on multiple levels simultaneously, the way most people's lives do when you take the time to look at the full picture. She ministered at the Well Worship Center. She was part-time at Ulta Beauty, where colleagues remembered her as one of the most kind, vibrant, and caring people they had ever had the chance to know. One coworker wrote in the aftermath of her death that she had been supposed to do Tammy's makeup that weekend for her birthday, that Tammy had a birthday coming, that the person she was planning to celebrate was now gone. That detail, the birthday makeup appointment that would never happen, is the kind of small and completely ordinary thing that grief reaches for when the larger loss is too enormous to hold all at once. She was described by those who knew her as full of light, as someone who loved God, her family, and her church family, as someone who loved serving her community and serving God's people, as someone who definitely left a mark on the body of Christ. These are not the sanitized eulogies of people reaching for something to say. These are the words of people describing someone they actually knew, someone whose absence from the specific texture of their daily lives they are already feeling. And she was a wife. She had been a wife for more than 30 years. She and Eddie McCollum had built a life together across 3 decades, the kind of sustained shared history that accumulates in ways that are impossible to fully account for from the outside. 30 years of mournings. 30 years of arguments and reconciliations and anniversaries, and the ordinary friction of 2 people occupying the same space, across a span of time long enough to contain entire chapters of who each person used to be and who they had since become. 30 years of watching each other change. At some point, publicly, Tammy McCollum had told the world what she thought of the man she had chosen to spend those 30 years with. She described him as an amazing man of God. She said she planned to spend her life with him. Those words are now part of the record of this case in a way she could never have anticipated when she wrote them. They are not an indictment of her judgment. They are a window into what the marriage looked like from the inside, or at least what it looked like from the inside at the moment she chose to describe it publicly. And they are a reminder of something that cases like this one force us to confront repeatedly, which is that the version of a relationship visible to the outside world, including the version visible to the person inside it, is never the complete picture. Eddie McCollum was 61 years old. He worked as a teaching assistant at Southwest Middle School in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system, specifically in the program for exceptional children, students with developmental and learning differences who require specialized support and sustained patience. He was a man whose professional life was built around showing up for people who needed extra care. He attended the Well Worship Center alongside his wife. Joyce Phillips, who had worked alongside both of them in ministry for 8 years, said publicly, in the aftermath of the shooting, that the couple she knew really loved each other, that he really loved his wife, that she was grappling with what had happened because it did not match the version of Eddie McCollum that she had known across nearly a decade of shared ministry. Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department records showed no prior calls for service at the McCollum home in the year preceding the shooting, no domestic disturbance calls, no welfare checks, no record of a situation that had previously reached the threshold of law enforcement involvement. Whatever was happening inside that marriage, whatever had been building or shifting or fracturing in ways that the people closest to them had not fully seen, it had not produced the kind of visible, documented escalation that shows up in the public record of so many other intimate partner homicide cases this channel has covered. That absence of a prior record is one of the most important and most difficult dimensions of this case to process, because it complicates the narrative that most people bring to domestic homicide, the narrative of visible warning signs and a system that failed to act on them. There were no calls. There were no prior incidents documented in the police record. There was a 30-year marriage that people who knew them from the outside described as loving. And then there was 2 a.m. on April 6th, an argument, a gun, and a 911 call. What the argument was about has not been disclosed publicly. Police did not release the specific nature of the dispute. Court documents cited the shooting as having occurred during a domestic argument, but the content of that argument, what was said, what crossed the line from conflict into something irreversible, has not entered the public record. That silence around the specific trigger is something that investigators will continue to examine as the case moves toward trial. It is also a silence that the public is often uncomfortable with, because the instinct when something this catastrophic happens is to find the clear causal chain, the identifiable breaking point, the moment where the narrative shifted. In cases where there is no documented history of prior violence and no known immediate trigger, that chain is harder to construct, and the questions it leaves behind are harder to sit with. What we do have is the 911 call, and the 911 call is its own document of what was happening inside Eddie McCollum in the immediate aftermath of what he had done. He called himself. He was not turned in by a neighbor or identified through surveillance or tracked down by investigators. He picked up the phone and he called emergency services and he told them what he had done before they knew to look for him. "Oh my God, I just shot my wife." That opening statement, given voluntarily, before any questioning, before any Miranda advisement, before any of the procedural machinery of criminal investigation had engaged, is the most legally significant thing Eddie McCollum said that night. What followed it was something that is harder to categorize legally but psychologically revealing in its own way. The crying out to God, the repeated appeals for divine help in the immediate aftermath of an act that no divine intervention could now undo. Lord, help me. Those words from a man who attended church alongside his wife, who was part of a faith community that had watched both of them in ministry, who had heard his wife preach on resurrection and grace and the power of faith to carry people through the darkest moments, are words that carry a specific weight in the context of this case. They are not strategic. No one calculates a plea to God for strategic advantage in a criminal proceeding. They are what they appear to be, the unfiltered expression of a man who has just done something he cannot process and who has reached, in the absence of anything else, toward the framework of belief that has organized his life. When the dispatcher told him to walk out of the house with his hands up, he said no. He said he was not leaving her. He stayed inside the home with the body of his wife of 30 years until officers arrived and removed him from the scene. He told police when they arrived the same thing he had told the dispatcher. He pointed them to where the gun was. It was on the stairs. He had placed it there after the shooting, not hidden, not disposed of, not taken anywhere, just left on the stairs of the house, a detail that investigators noted, and that speaks to a state of mind in which concealment was apparently not the priority. He was appointed a public defender at his first court hearing. He is being held on a $1 million bond. Now let's talk about what this case opens up beyond the specific facts of April 6th. Because Pastor Tammy McCollum's death did not only produce grief inside one congregation and one family. It landed inside a much larger conversation that has been happening, sometimes loudly and sometimes very quietly, in spaces that don't always make it into mainstream true crime coverage. Black women make up between half and three-quarters of the people sitting in church pews across America on any given Sunday. Less than 10% of clergy or church leadership positions are held by black women. That disparity is not accidental. It is the product of specific theological traditions and specific power structures within those traditions that have historically positioned men as the appropriate holders of spiritual authority and women as the appropriate supporters and nurturers of that authority. Tammy McCollum built a ministry in that context. She stood at a pulpit in a tradition that does not always make room for women at that pulpit, and she preached anyway, with enough power and enough consistency, and enough devotion that her congregation loved her, and her colleagues remembered her as full of light. And she was killed by the man who sat in that congregation, by the man who shared her life, by the man she had called an amazing man of God. Researchers and advocates who work at the intersection of faith communities and domestic violence have documented for years the specific silence that surrounds intimate partner violence within black church contexts. Black women who experience abuse within their marriages frequently face pressure, explicit or implicit, to maintain the marriage, to pray through the difficulty, to submit to the leadership of the household, to protect the reputation of the family and the congregation from the damage that disclosure might cause. Women in clergy positions face an additional layer of that pressure, because their identity as a spiritual leader is bound up in their public credibility, and because the specific vulnerability of being a pastor with an abusive partner is one that few pastoral counseling resources are designed to address. Retired counselor and pastor Rev. Dr. Michelle Balamani-Silvera said it plainly in the aftermath of McCollum's death. She said, "We sometimes act as if the calling somehow exempts us from the violence, just because." That sentence, its incompleteness reflecting the weight of what it is describing, names something important: the assumption that faith insulates. That a woman who preaches on Easter Sunday about resurrection and grace and the power of God to carry people through darkness could not possibly be living inside a situation that requires the same kind of carrying. That the pastor is somehow protected by her own ministry from the things her ministry addresses. She was not protected. No calling protects. No faith tradition, no matter how sincerely held or powerfully expressed, removes any person from the statistical reality of intimate partner violence. Black women face rates of intimate partner homicide 2.5 times higher than white women. That statistic does not pause for ordination. It does not pause for 30-year marriages that look loving from the outside. It does not pause for Easter Sunday. What we do not know, and what the public record as it currently stands does not tell us, is what the interior of the McCollum marriage looked like beyond what was visible from outside it. We do not know whether there was a history of conflict that never reached the police. We do not know whether Tammy McCollum had spoken to anyone, a friend, a family member, another pastor, about anything that frightened her inside that marriage. We do not know what the argument was about, or what specifically happened in the hours between the end of the Easter service and 2 a.m. We do not know what Eddie McCollum was experiencing in the weeks and months before April 6th, whether there was something accumulating in him that the people around him had not recognized or had not known how to name. What we know is that a 58-year-old woman preached on Easter Sunday and was gone before Monday arrived. What we know is that her husband of 30 years called 911 and confessed immediately. What we know is that a community of people who loved Tammy McCollum is now trying to figure out how to grieve her and how to honor what she built while also processing the fact that the instrument of her death was someone they had believed they knew. The Well Worship Center released a statement asking for prayer. They quoted Matthew 5:4, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." They asked for privacy for the family. They asked for kindness in word and action. They said they would provide details for memorial arrangements as they became available. It is the statement of a community that is absorbing something it does not yet have the language to fully address, something that sits at the intersection of grief and shock, and the specific disorientation of losing someone to violence, when violence was not part of the story you thought you were in. Eddie McCollum is in the Mecklenburg County Jail on a $1 million bond. He has been charged with first-degree murder. The case is moving through the North Carolina court system. He has a public defender. The investigation is ongoing. The specific details of what led to the argument and what happened inside that house in the hours between Easter Sunday morning and 2 a.m. will continue to emerge as the legal process moves forward. But Tammy McCollum is already gone. Her birthday passed. The makeup appointment her colleague had planned for her did not happen. Her congregation gathered without her. The pulpit at the Well Worship Center was empty on the Sunday after the Sunday she had filled it with everything she had. She was 58 years old. She was full of light. She loved God and her family and her church family and serving her community. She was Ulta Beauty's best employee, according to the people who worked alongside her, and she was a pastor whose presence in a room made the room better, according to the people who sat in her congregation. She had a birthday coming. She had a congregation that needed her. She had 30 years of a life built alongside another person, and whatever the interior of that life contained, she had not stopped showing up. She had not stopped preaching. She had not stopped giving what she had to the people who needed it. She preached on Easter Sunday. She went home. She deserved to wake up on Monday. If you or someone you know is navigating a situation inside a relationship or inside a faith community where you do not feel safe, please reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Free, confidential, available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, by call, text, and chat at the hotline.org. Resources are available for every background, every community, every faith tradition. No one should be navigating this alone. No calling exempts anyone from needing help, and no faith community is too sacred for the conversation about safety to happen inside it. Subscribe to Behind the Evidence. Share this video for Tammy, for every woman sitting in a pew or standing at a pulpit who needs to know that the conversation is possible and the help is real. Behind the evidence, there is always more, and we are always going to find it.